To archives, crafting the future of documentary storytelling. And this is going to be looking at different film projects where they both draw on archives, and then in the process of making the films, they're expanding the archives and expanding the way we examine historical issues and problems. So it's a fascinating, for an investigative journalist, it's a really fascinating topic, to sort of dig deep and expand sort of the repository of available materials. So I'm just going to introduce the moderator, who is Rachel Antell. She is an archival producer and a founder of Subbasement, which does archival work for documentary filmmakers. And Rachel is going to come up here, and she's going to introduce the panelists. I want you to give a warm double exposure welcome to Rachel, please.
I go. Okay, the response is ame, and it means I'm here. It's like, are you here? I'm here. So I hear a lot of chatter in the back, and I'm going to ask folks to move up to the front. Can you please move up to the front? And if you want to have a conversation, if you could there are plenty of beautiful seating areas just outside. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, hello, and welcome to the panel, Mining and Contributing to the Archives, Crafting the Future of Documentary Storytelling. My name is Rachel Antell, and as Diana said, I'm an archival producer and co-founder of the Archival Producers Alliance. I'm so excited to be joined today by several filmmakers who've produced some really wonderful archive-rich documentary films. Archival materials, a unique archival find, can really shape what story you're telling. It can ground your film in a broader historical context and offer a profound sense of connection to another person's world. And often, as interesting as the archival materials themselves, these old photos, these old films, as interesting as those is the journey that the filmmakers took to find them. And if that's a process you haven't thought about before today, you're in for a real treat. The filmmakers here with us today are going to share the different paths that each of them walked to craft their unique historical documentaries. So we have representatives of 3 films here today. The first is Bombshell, which is still in post-production, and that is a working title. Bombshell examines U.S. government propaganda censorship and the role of the press in reporting from 1945 to 47 on the atomic bombings in Japan through the lens of 4 correspondents who take very different approaches. Representing the film today, we have Ben Loeterman and filmmaker Ben Loeterman and co-producer Gaia De Simoni. Ben is a recognized filmmaker of current affairs and history documentaries whose films have aired on PBS and BBC, Sundance Channel, and others. Gaia is a journalist with experience in print, digital, and more recently in documentary film. Do you guys want to come up? The second film today is American Coup, which will be showing at the festival. American Coup, Wilmington, 1898. It was directed by Brad Lichtenstein and Yoruba Riken, and it tells the little-known story of a deadly race massacre and carefully orchestrated insurrection in North Carolina's largest city in 1898, the only coup d'etat in the history of the U.S. Today we're joined by the associate producer and archival producer of the film, Teresa Murphy. Teresa is a writer and filmmaker, most recently serving as the associate producer for 371 Productions, an Emmy Award-winning production company. Teresa. And finally, we have Acts of Reparation, a film about 2 friends, Selina, who is black, and Macky, who is white, who travel to the South together to reckon with their roots and explore what reparations mean to them. Selina gathers stories to uncover the buried tales of her ancestors. Macky challenges his relatives to dismantle privilege that they inherited from enslavers. Today we're joined by the filmmakers Selina Davidson and Macky Alston. Selina is a producer of documentary films and TV and co-founder of Greenhouse Pictures production company. Acts of Reparation marks her directorial debut. And Macky Alston is an award-winning documentary director and producer who also founded Auburn Media and Hartley Media Impact Initiative, both which help faith leaders to use media to work for justice. So, welcome to all the filmmakers. So to kick us off, each filmmaker or filmmaking duo is going to take about 10 minutes to talk about their experience of making the film, of gathering the archival, and they're going to also share a few clips, which will be a real treat. And then we'll have a conversation here between us before I open it up for questions and answers. So we'll start it off with, everyone has a mic, good. We will start it off with Bombshell.
So I'm Ben Loeterman. I'm with Gaia. We're making Bombshell. For me, I realized it's the end of a trilogy of films I'm making about the press, and in some ways about investigative journalism. So I'm going to show you first a clip, not about Bombshell, but about Leo Frank, who was lynched in the South in 1912. Just, if you can, there's a little bit of newspaper-like stuff in the clip. Just watch that carefully. We'll talk about it after. So that's clip one.
Mary Fagan. You know a girl named Mary Fagan?
No, I don't know any girl named Mary Fagan. You would stay tuned to see the latest bizarre, frightening development.
We call the people versus Leo M. Frank.
She had her clothes up to here. Mr. Frank was down on his knees. She had her hands on Mr. Frank.
Jim Conley was mesmerizing.
The statement of the Negro Conley is a tissue of lies from first to last.
If Frank hadn't been a Jew, he never would have been prosecuted.
Guilty! Guilty!
Leo Frank was given the death sentence. It was over. Except it wasn't over.
So that's a little clip from the Leo Frank film that I did about 10 years ago. It was my first big NEH-funded film, and it's a documentary, which I argue a lot with people about. But in terms of archive, I wanted to mention two things. Between that film and Bombshell, we have gone backwards in terms of production values, or downwards, perhaps. This film had a lot of production values, so that newspaper stuff you see, those are taken from messy Xeroxes. We're making a film now, Bombshell, that couldn't have been made without something called newspapers.com. And Leo Frank was made before newspapers.com. So the archives did two things for us. One, it provided us the visuals that then I gave to animators to do stop frame animation, completely recreate each newspaper article, make the extra that we knew was red, make it red, find an old press, and then that becomes a motif in the film. Something that's not in the clip is, I think our film also includes the first investigative photographs ever done. The New York Times sent its own team down to Georgia in 1912, and they did recreations, and they took photographs of it, so that was interesting. The biggest part about this clip is that it wrote the script for me, which is great, because I got the Writers Guild payment. And we thought it would be very simple. We would just, take the court transcript and build it out of that. And then we learned there was no court transcript. It was stolen from the court in 1950. So all of that is pieced together from many, many different newspapers. From there, I just want to show a quick clip about something else I did, which was about Walter Winchell in about the 1930s, 40s. Let's show that clip number 2.
This is the trial of the century, and any byline in America wants to be there.
Winchell showed up every day at the courthouse with his typewriter, pounding out thousands of words a day of copy. And Winchell stayed out through the whole trial, weeks of this. He believed that this was a way to demonstrate that he was a serious reporter.
Winchell doesn't just take a reporter's byline, he becomes the headline. In doing so, he pioneers the blending of news and entertainment.
From Row A, Seat 5, Flemington Courthouse, January 17th. Witnesses confirmed this writer's contention at the time. The money was allegedly spent by Bruno on September 15th, 1934 in the morning.
He understood that people wanted novelty, that fact was irrelevant, really.
So that's Walter Winchell. And that film was made during the pandemic. And we had these big Leo Frank-like recreations all planned, and that all went out the window. So what we had to do is take that recreation budget, give it to animators and graphics people and say, try to make this into something. So that was our challenge. We had a good person voicing Walter Winchell. That's Stanley Tucci, who I conned into doing a voiceover and then said, you don't mind if we have a couple cameras there, we just want to, So we ended up using that. So, and now we're going even more basic with Bombshell.
Yeah, I think let's show clip number 3 before we talk about it.
By the spring of 1946, America's nuclear program is ramping up. The military has plans for more nuclear testing in the Pacific. Hersey is finishing up an assignment in China when he learns of pending nuclear tests in the Bikini Atoll.
Hersey was feeling cold feet about the New Yorker article. He thought timing's wrong, and there were going to be more nuclear tests on the Bikini Atoll.
He wondered and cabled to Sean whether that might be such an important news peg that writing about Hiroshima would no longer be of interest to people. Sean cabled him back and said, the more time that passes, the more convinced we are that piece has wonderful possibilities. Think it best, time it for anniversary.
With 4 months to go before the anniversary of August 6th, Hersey hops on a naval destroyer for Japan to start his new assignment.
When Hersey was on the ship, he was sort of thinking like, this Hiroshima thing, I can't get my mind around how on earth I would do this.
While I was on the destroyer, I came down with the flu. And they brought me some books from the ship's library. And one of them was The Bridge of San Luis Rey, which is about 5 people who are on a rope bridge which falls and breaks while they're all on it.
The book weaves together each one's story that led them to be randomly on this bridge at the same moment.
And a light bulb went off in Hersey's head.
The bomb. The bomb has a moment when it affects everybody all within a split second.
And I saw reading that a way of approaching Hiroshima by settling on a few people and trying to make their lives real to the reader. Journalism would be enriched by using the methods of fiction because the reader can identify with the character and almost feel what the character is experiencing.
All right. So we decided to show this clip because I think it speaks for the challenges we had for this film. John Hersey, whom I hope you know who he was an excellent journalist who wrote not just Hiroshima for The New Yorker, but for Adano, won the Pulitzer. He was also a very private person. So we talked to the family. We wanted to interview the family, but they said, you know what, we want to respect our father's choices. So we want his work to speak for itself. So we were like, all right. When he was alive, he didn't give any interview, like only 3 interviews to the press. So, but then we found, reading old books, researching footnotes, going into archives, that he actually gave an audio interview, which I know for documentaries most of the time is not ideal. You want to see a TV interview, like a video interview, to Kay Bonetti. So we who was doing a project at the time for the American Audio Prose Library. And she was interviewing authors in the 80s. So he gave her this interview. It was recorded. We found it. And another surprise, good surprise, was that it's copyright free. So which is a good thing, for filmmakers. You don't have to pay for it. And we were able to use it in the film. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
And it led us to the person asking John Hersey the questions, this woman, Gaia Kay Bonetti, who turns out to be a major interview in our film.
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, and we'll definitely follow up on all of that. Next, we have Teresa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out today. I'm Teresa Murphy, and I was the associate producer, which is basically a catch-all for solving the hardest problem on the film, which turned out to be archival. So I became the archival producer, essentially. Thank you. And I think that I just want to show the clip first so that you can become contextualized in Wilmington, 1898, in the only successful coup that has happened in America that almost no one knows about.
The white supremacy campaign also had two militias at their disposal, the Wilmington Light Infantry and the Naval Reserves. They were supposed to report to the governor in Raleigh, who was a Republican, but in fact, the commanders of these two militias were leaders of the white supremacy campaign. In the summer of 1898, both militias, all white, were called up for federal service in the Spanish-American War. But the leaders of the white supremacy campaign made sure they were back in Wilmington before the midterm election.
There is a statewide regiment of black soldiers that is also deployed. The white regiments are sent home, but the black regiment is still held in reserve far from Wilmington. This leaves the black community unprotected.
The city's merchants wanted to make sure they had enough firepower to overwhelm the majority black population, so they brought a Colt rapid-fire gun, which was a new weapon then. It was basically one of the first machine guns. The merchants also bought something called a Hotchkiss gun and provided it to the Naval Reserves, and they mounted that as well on a wagon.
So they're preparing for war. That's what this period is. Preparation for war.
I am Ann Keenan, and William R. Keenan was my great-grandfather's uncle. He was a captain of the Wilmington Light Infantry. He had lost his position as customs collector in Wilmington to John Dancy. He was put in charge of one of the Colt rapid-fire machine guns.
White people are already beginning to patrol places where African Americans are going to be voting on Election Day. They are visiting these areas with guns in their hands. The hope is that African American men will stay home, that African American men will not even attempt to exercise their constitutional right to vote.
What was happening among white employers, if they found out a black employee had registered to vote, they were being fired.
Many began to say, well, perhaps we should stay home. Perhaps if we stay home, we can avoid conflict. When African American women began to learn that black men are even considering not participating in the election, they are outraged. They see this as a problem because African American men are the representatives for black families.
Resolved that every Negro who refuses to register his name next Saturday that he may vote, we shall make it our business to deal with him in a way that will not be pleasant. He shall be branded a white-livered coward who will sell his liberty and the liberty of our whole race to the demons who are even now seeking to take away the most sacred rights vouchsafed to any people. Resolve further that we have these resolutions published in our daily record, the one medium that has stood up for our rights when others have forsaken us. Respectfully submitted. An organization of colored ladies.
streaming next Tuesday, guys. But I just want to start where that left off, which is with the Daily Record. The Daily Record was the only Black-owned daily newspaper in the world during 1898. It was owned by Alex Manly, whose descendant is in our film. And Alex Manly was a Black entrepreneur in Wilmington. He was wildly successful. Wilmington was a fusionist town in 1898, and the Black population was thriving there. You had multiple images that you can see of Black people and white people working together in shops. This is not happening across America, but it is happening in Wilmington. But the Daily Record, it was around for 4 years, and there are 7 copies left, we think. That shows you how this history has been absolutely buried, and the importance of archival in this film isn't just shaping the story, it is the story, because we're refuting a narrative that has been perpetuated, a propaganda campaign that has been perpetuated for over 100 years. Wilmingtonians are just learning the truth about this, and so you need images to prove that this is actually what happened. So I just take that to heart, and like every single image that we found, you could show it to a descendant and say, this is validating your story. And that's what I love about the film, because you watch them experience those emotions. But it also brings up, because it's in 1898, an issue for archival, which is that there's not a lot of images taken during 1898, especially by a population that is being run out of town or massacred. They're fearing for their lives. They're not taking photos. And then the photos that do exist are being buried and literally burned to the ground. The Daily Record building was burned to the ground. There is an empty, vacant lot to this day. So where do you start to find these stories? Because, you know, my director comes to me and he says, we want to make a documentary about this thing that seems like very hard to visually tell. And so we started with building these connections with the people on the ground that had been doing this work. You know, we came to this story 3 years ago, but people have been trying to bring this story to light for decades. So that was really where the work started to take off. And the local resources that became available to us once we built that relationship of trust was unparalleled. I mean, these librarians were staying after hours, combing through the libraries with us. You know, what would happen is like Black descendants would come in with unmarked boxes. Most people were illiterate at that time, so nothing is labeled. Very few things are labeled. And they're just saying, here, I found this in my grandma's cousin's attic. Maybe it has something to do with Wilmington, what happened here in 1898. And then you have to go in and look at it and prove that this is who they think that it is. So, you know, we're matching up insurance records, we're matching up maps during that time. I'm literally looking at the skyline of aerial photos that were taken to be like, that is the bank that was taken from them that, you know, one of the descendants should own to this day, but is now controlled by someone else. But you have to verify that every single image that you see, the ones that you can find. But all of that hard work kind of culminates to these spectacular moments of descendants being able to hold a copy of the Daily Record in their hands for the first time since it was burned to the ground. There's a bunch of students from UNCW and 2 men in Wilmington have been working for 5 years to locate different clippings of this newspaper and put them together. And we follow the descendant as he goes to the conservatory that placed it all together, and he holds it, and he's like, I didn't think that this was possible again. So all of that, those obstacles make the film what it is, because you're saying, this was taken from you. Our film and all of the amazing people that have been doing this work before us put in this work, and now these descendants are finally getting kind of some reclamation. But those were just some of the things that we encountered. But I really learned that to find images from 1898, you have to build connections with people so that they're willing to go into their closet for you and say, I think that this might help you. And I hope that that's what this film will spur. We think that there's more copies of the Daily Record out there. We think that there's more images of descendants. We encountered, while filming, people that were looking at their genealogical records and saying, I also have this picture that looks like this guy. And then they meet their cousins in Wilmington. And so people are still piecing together this history, and the archives are a really big part of that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Macky and Selina?
Hi, I'm Selina Davidson.
I'm Macky Alston.
And we're co-directors and producers of Acts of Reparation. And I think we also wanted to start with our clip.
You've been a genealogist all your life, but something different has been happening. What has it been like?
With this journey, I have been able to go to Louisiana, put my feet on the ground in Monroe, so that I can make the ancestors human, not just names on a census list. All the information that I gather fills in the gaps. Sally Bryant is Robert Ford, who we call Big Daddy's mom, and Classy Ross is Mary Ross Ford, who we call Mame's mom. Robert and Mary's mothers were neighbors, and they all were sharecroppers on the Stubbs plantation. This is Monroe in 1906. The clothing that the women are wearing reminds me of the images that we have of Classy and Sally. Mary and Robert got married at Classy's house. Then they moved to Sycard to be sharecroppers, and they lived in the quarters.
It was a place where this man had a farm. And all the people who lived in the quarters worked on the farm. There was a porch between the kitchen and the other part of the house. To get to the kitchen, you'd walk the porch and go on to the house.
So the kitchen was separate?
Yeah.
So we think that the dots are the quarters.
So these little dots are where your family would have lived?
Yeah. To be able to put place, time together with the ancestors that I am trying to imagine what their life was like, finding these photos means everything to me.
One of the longings in genealogical work is to sort of find who we are in the people who came before us. As my great-great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather, I came upon just this one note in the end of the book of John. And the note says, "If the Lord will enable me, I feel disposed never to strike a servant from this day for any offense, till after one day time, for my notion on the quantity and nature of the punishment they should have." July 3rd, 1825.
I have scoured this house over and over again all my life. For me to find this Bible right now, and then to find the one thing written by Billington Sanders in this whole house, in this Bible, be about enslavement and violence in regard to enslavement, it feels like this has been left for me to grapple with.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here. So this film was an opportunity for me to go and mine me to go from Oakland and do reverse migration to try and find my stories. And my great aunts, some of which were still living there in their 80s and 90s, pulled out their family albums. And that was kind of the first level of work. And the photos were tools for me to actually collect the stories. And with that, I just realized it's the discovery, but also how much preservation and sharing out these images and documents and everything that we found, how important that is. We also got local library that used to be the white library in a very segregated town that's still pretty segregated to help us try and discover some of the ancestors that came before my elders. And yeah, it is, the search is the film, and what we discover and the stories and the images are how I personally can envision what life was like, that my children can maybe envision. And yeah, and that was a lot of help from elders as well as, professionals in the field. And the sharing out, I think Macky can talk about that on his side too. In our impact campaign, one of the things that I'm doing is going to different communities. I started in Monroe about a month ago, and offering tools to folks in the community so that they can bring in their albums and scan, and they can look for their stories, and then we can also all share our stories. And that's been really powerful, and is the importance of sharing it back out, whether it's just for your family, but hopefully it's being shared out to community and starts to fill in the gaps.
It's interesting how our film speaks to your film, because I feel like we are those people who are going into our attics and supplying the archival material.
Thank you.
That journalists, thank you, can look to for generations and generations to come. Early on in the film, we ask one another as friends and co-filmmakers of 30 years, what does reparations mean to each of us? And Selina said, I have to know my stories before I even know what needs to be repaired. And I deserve the inheritance of the healing traditions of my ancestors and want them. And so off she went on that quest. Well, part of my quest was a truth-telling quest, and that meant going into my attics and going to my elders as well, and figuring out a truer narrative than the one I was told growing up. One of the things that Selina encouraged me to do was to find Black and Native leaders in the county where I come from, Greene County, Georgia, which is very rural, very poor. And pretty quickly, I found a woman named Mamie Hillman, who for 25 years had been working to open a Black History Museum. And though she had gotten lip service in support, she had not gotten any substantial support because the community was afraid of what it meant to live in the light of truth, pretty universally. And so part of our work was to be in support of Mamie Hillman. Very early, she said, I'm looking for a Black cemetery that's been lost. And this is so interesting in regard to how race and networks, kin networks work on the local level. Just the day before, my uncle had been talking to folks around town about what we were up to. And an old man who was about to die said to my Uncle Charlie, you need to bring that boy around here. I have some stories to get off my chest. And he shared the story of this Black cemetery that, in a sense, had been disappeared to the Black community generations ago. So the day after, when I met Mamie Hillman, and she said, can you help me find the cemetery? My jaw dropped to the ground, and I said, "You're not going to believe it." And by the way, that man died 3 weeks later. And you see in the film Mamie Hillman leading a charge to restore that cemetery that institutions like Mercer University and other universities in Georgia got involved in because they were implicated. And through Ancestry, through other networks that are interesting in regard to archival research, we found the descendants of those who were buried in the cemetery. And Mamie Hillman sort of led a project of helping Black and white folk from those regions begin to bring these ancestors to life. And one of the parts of the impact campaign that Selina described is for white folk to ask the question, what's in our attics, and how can we provide the archival material that in it records the lives and sometimes photographs of folks, ancestors of Black folk in the community, and also more truthful narratives of what happened in the community in regard to white terror, and to provide that in service of Black history keeping and Black folk finding their ancestors.
I just wanted to follow up. In the clip we showed, there is a photo of a white man in a tractor and a Black man with a mule. And there's also the map with where the quarters are. And in the beginning of trying to find the stories, I, through genealogy, found that all 4 of my family lines all worked on the Stubbs plantation in Monroe. And that's why I say they were neighbors. And I was in contact with the Stubbs white family descendants, and they would not participate in being on camera in the film, but did provide that photo and did provide the map, and at the 11th hour let us have permission to use them. And to me, that's a baby step, but it's a great step. And a cousin of theirs, Pam Parsons Dupuy, she lives in what's called Leighton Castle, which is kind of the last huge plantation house. And she inherited the home and the legacy of the families. And she worked kind of in parallel with us. She was new into Monroe. She wasn't there, but she went into her attic, and that's why we call it What's in Your Attic, and found tons of slave records, ledgers, tons of stuff. And she has, while we were making the film, partnered with the University of Monroe to start to archive that. And in the very beginning, she was not interested at all in sharing it, but knew that she was taking that first step to at least archive it. And 5 years later, she is starting to share the stuff out publicly. So I just want to add that.
Which is an interesting story about how truth-telling, archival material, and culture change can take place as we move around and say, and build relationship over the long haul, to see to it that the truth is surfaced. It's just the fact that in your family and in my family and in our families, our collective histories hold pieces of the national narrative. As a child, I had a childhood friend in Durham, North Carolina, named John Keenan. And when we were making this film, he called me up and said, "Macky, I've got repair work to do to my family. I descend from this guy, William Keenan, who was a part of the Wilmington Massacre." And so, you know.
Did you know that was in there?
I didn't know it was in there. And so I just had a moment, and we'll call John quite soon. And John wants to be a part of that. And so how we invite folks in, one of the impact campaign strategies that we're also using is we're organizing white circles of practice of small groups of white people who want to do repair work and asking them to pledge, what is your act of reparation and how can we hold you accountable? And when we've screened the film in Louisiana and in my home county, and to see my cousins sign up for those circles was a revelatory thing I thought would never happen.
Well, those are some amazing stories. And I know people probably have a lot of questions. I'm going to ask a few first before I turn it over to the audience. I wanted to circle back to where you ended was saying that some of the archival that you found ended up leading you to an actual interview. So there is this interplay between the archival and the filmmaking, and you can't necessarily know what story you're going to tell till you find the archival. So can you share that story at all, what happened there? Or if there were other stories like that of serendipity that moved the story forward in an unexpected way.
Well, I think when you engage in this work, you automatically go there. You start to do, as you've both seen, you start to pick out somebody from a photograph and put it together with something else. In my collective cases of the films, the archive acted as a writer. It gave us a script. It acted as casting because we found key interviews through it. Unlike some of what I've heard, I've always personally viewed archives with suspicion. I told you I consider them hostile witnesses because I am always afraid that the archivist is beholden to somebody who gave them that material and is going to tell a family, or in the case of John Hersey, we were going to Beinecke Library at Yale, and I didn't know what was getting channeled back to them, and I'm always suspicious of that. And in my experience, that has been borne out. That happens. So I'm curious about your aspiring and inspiring stories about archives flowing forth.
I can speak on that a little. We have a descendant who started this work in the 80s. Her great-great-grandfather owned a bank, and he had to flee town and lost his bank. And so she lost all of that generational wealth. So she wanted to find out more about it and what this bank was called and all of that. So she went into the local archives and was basically told, no, you cannot look into this. We have these records. You cannot see them. And she fought against that for about 10 years. And now those librarians are welcoming her with open arms, and she's like leading the fight to tell this story. She's traveling with this film and talking about it and sharing her ancestor's name around the country. So I think that I think it depends on the institution and the archive house, but there's definitely reason to be skeptical. I mean, as I said, people do lie and they do propagate false narratives, but for the people and the institutions that are willing to engage with truth-telling work, we were lucky to have those in Wilmington today. It was not always the case, though.
And I think what you're talking about really gets at what you guys were saying about relationship building, and that sometimes it's not always going to be quick and easy. And often, I don't know if I'd think of them as hostile witnesses, but I think, and some of them may just be bad actors, but I think generally they see themselves as custodians of this material, and they may feel suspicious too, on their side of like, where is this going to end up? How is this going to be used? And we made this commitment. So I do think that in building relationships, you end up with a joint shared care for the material, and it can get you where you're going. But I mean, filmmakers don't always have that kind of time, and that's an important part of the struggle. For all the three of you, it sounds like you've really not just gathered archival, but you're creating archives. I mean, you're really creating the next part of the story. I'm wondering, Tess, are you planning? Do the filmmakers and you all plan on doing something with what's been gathered, or is that?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah. we're redefining the textbooks in North Carolina. Not our team, but I think just the film is contributing to work that's been done and bringing light to the story. So I think there's a textbook that's still being used in North Carolina from the 50s that says that this was a race riot perpetrated by black people. If that was what it was taught, I think, until the 80s, and then they just took it out of the curriculum. And then in the 2000s, they've started teaching it a little bit, but I mean, teachers are having to pick that lesson plan up by themselves and research, Google, what was the Wilmington 1898 race riot, which is what it was called until basically this decade. So yeah, we're doing a whole education campaign. PBS is leading that initiative, and we're really just hoping to share these images and then bring more in, like I said, to keep growing this archive as people find their own photos. And I think that there will be a lot of journalists who want to find more issues of the Daily Record and also other more evidence of the black wealth that was lost for reparations efforts.
That's amazing. And so Selina and Macky, obviously your film is a very personal journey. The whole thing is it's an internal quest as well as an external quest. I'm wondering, when you were setting out to find these stories and these archival materials, was there anything you really, really wanted to find that you didn't end up finding? Was there anything you had in your mind that you thought would be uncovered?
Well, for me, black archives are really rare. And so having any period pieces that were specifically in Monroe before the 1930s, super duper rare. And I found two, right? And I was just like, oh, I can't believe it. And that was an amazing thing. I'm still looking. I mean, I could have more and more, because this isn't just finding the archive for the film, right? It's the quest continues. I'm trying to find my family stuff. But I did also want to say, when you were talking about archives or depository, I'm building a family archive. That for sure will be shared out to my family. We're still discussing, do we want it to go anywhere and where? I think in the black community, there's a lot of skepticism. And there's a lot of reason why they don't necessarily want to trust certain institutions. So trying to find safe space that's safe for both us to put it in and all the people that I will be meeting along the way in the next year as we do this in different cities, and offer that to people. But safe place for it to be, and then a safe place for black folk to come and find. And those are both hard. The institutions and the archive houses, aren't necessarily safe places for that.
One of the plot points in the film, wow, that sounds interesting, is that Selina, I remember when we met Mamie Hillman and she was trying to get her museum off the ground in Greene County, Georgia, Selina said to me, maybe I should be co-director of the museum, because she needed help. She was looking for partnership. I said, you're a filmmaker, what are you talking about? And suddenly it dawned on me, even though we've been working together for 30 years, that the archival side of our work is Selina's vocation. And so it just so happens that in Monroe, Louisiana, she discovers or rediscovers the house where her great-great-aunt had worked as a domestic her whole entire life and lived in a little house in the back. And it was falling apart. And Selina had a dream to buy it and to create a center for Black history keeping in Monroe, Louisiana. And you begin to see that happening in the film, and it's still happening now. And a part of our relationship is to support that work. And so you see these two Black women in the film, Mamie Hillman and Selina, Louis Davidson, working to create those centers that can not only be safe keeping centers for archives, not only there, but also locations that teach folks and provide access to the means of keeping history, to discover, preserve, and share their histories as they wish, which is powerful. It really makes me excited about the activist side of archive work. And it was already said up here, but the librarians in our movie are just wild heroes. And it's extraordinary to see them work really, really hard to try to get to truth and to put it out in the world. One story that I'll tell about private investigation and archival work. In Greene County, there's the courthouse, and there's a history-keeping museum that's really white and has been controlled by county government. But it's a poor county, and they don't have the funds to keep the museum up. And the judge keeps the key in the drawer of her desk in the courthouse, and she is really busy. And I just kept showing up. I think you all know how this goes as documentary filmmakers and archivists. And I said, look, I'll go over there by myself, if that's all right, if you're too busy to take me over there. She said no, she said no, she said no, and then I came back and she said, all right, just take the key. And she said, just don't go in the back room. So it was the big room with the mannequins, with the costumes, and a narrative, a kind of lost cause narrative portrayed in the main history room. And then in the back room were all these file cabinets and stacks. And the stacks of photographs, I couldn't believe it. And I felt like, all the people in all the movies trying to take as many photographs as I can, as quickly as I can before they catch me. And in the file cabinets, there were files with family names, and one had my family name, and in it they said, see also this other family name. And I found a court case, literally a fat court case from 1870, in which the Roberts family sued my family to reclaim their daughter in 1870 that my family wouldn't relinquish. Her name was Betty Roberts. She was 10. And Cynthia Sanders, my ancestor, said, are you kidding me? I poured money into this child. You got to pay me $500, and then maybe you can have your child back. And these formerly enslaved people had traveled from Tennessee to come back to get their child. God knows how, in a time of extreme white terror. They sued Cynthia Sanders, a powerhouse in the community, and won. And so I got to then go on Ancestry and, with Mamie Hillman, look to find the descendants of the Roberts family and say, look what we found about your ancestors who went through hell, no doubt, to reclaim their daughter Betty. And I've been on about 5 calls with them to tell the story again and to show that, offer every piece of documentation. That's something, in the film, Selina asked me, what are you doing with Mamie Hillman? And other black folk who were around the cemetery just said, white folk, this is something you can do. Find the records, find the archives that your families control, and make them public for us.
Very powerful. Thank you. Let's see. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So think about your questions. I just wanted to follow up on what you said about this is a trilogy, these 3 films. You're thinking them in relation to each other. And you were also seeing it, you said it was going backwards, that it was, I want to hear a little more about how you conceive of the reenactments going down to the real archival and why you frame it that way, or what about it is.
I'm not sure who was here yesterday. There was a panel about artificial intelligence, and I think I said to you earlier in the day, how does this compare with my experience from years ago, wondering about, do we doctor the photo or not? Do we take the scratches and the dust out? Do we clean it up? One of my first jobs was getting Lee Harvey Oswald's passport, which I did as a black and white Xerox, and then had wonderful graphics people turn it into a full and living color passport. I bet that might not be viewed as such a good thing today. And I wonder, and we discuss is a kind way to say we fight among our film team, especially with one of my editors who edited that film way back when, who said, no, if we're doing something about the bomb, there has to be a kind of genuine quality to what we're showing the audience, that they're seeing the real deal, the real memos, the real newspaper articles. So I think, he says, we should keep the top secret stuff there, then crossed out, then stamped declassified in the 60s, and then stamped again in the 80s. And I'm saying, no, our story is in the 40s. I want to clean it up. Where are we on that debate, Guy?
I mean, we're still discussing it, I think. We're still fighting on it. But I would just want to link to what Selina said about building an archive, which is kind of what happened to us. Our story is not just about John Hersey. It's about other journalists. We have a black war correspondent, Charles Loeb, who went to Japan and reported about the effects of the atomic bomb. It's about a Japanese-American reporter. It's about other American and Australian reporters who went there and, were not in the spotlight like, of course, John Hersey's piece was. So especially for Charles Loeb and for black war correspondents, it's not like, you go to Getty and you find photos of these black war correspondents. Or like, you go to newspapers.com and find everything there. We kind of built an archive. We built his biography because Charles Loeb doesn't have papers. You don't go to Howard University and find his papers because he studied there. You can go to Cleveland and find some photos in the Cleveland Public Library, but that's it. So what we did was, okay, let's go to ProQuest, which is an amazing tool for black newspapers. And we searched Charles Loeb from 1920 until 1960. And we built the biography with that. We fought like articles that were written about him or by him, and we were able to track him and say, okay, he went to Okinawa, and then he went to Guam. And so we were able to tell his story of where he went. He was at the surrender in Tokyo, and then from there we tracked him, and he went, around Japan to report about the occupation, the American occupation. So it's hard, when you don't have resources, you don't have, papers, biographies. You have kind of to build it and to find photos, and we only have 3 photos of him. So because also the family is skeptical, as you said. So it's kind of like, it's not easy.
Yeah. It seems like there's a real interplay between what you find and what you create, and just keeping and building and building. And these community archives are becoming more and more a vital part of record keeping, is like people just going in. And I think people forget because there is so much we can get online, or we think, but it's like the tiniest percentage of archival materials that actually have been digitized and exist online. And even those can be hard to find, but that's not, like, archive is so much richer and broader than that. It's just, sometimes it's in libraries, and sometimes it's in attics and basements and all these different places. And it's a treasure hunt, very much.
I'm not sure how it folds into your experience. In ours, the archive will sometimes get material and either not know or not disclose where it comes from, or may say, we don't know. Now, as documentary filmmakers, we're trying to find out ownership so that we can pay somebody for rights and all that kind of thing. In the case of the Walter Winchell film, Winchell himself had typed out all of his radio scripts. And those were followed by Neil Gabler, who wrote a book about Winchell, to an auction desk. And he bought Winchell's own thick notebooks of his own scripts and donated that to the New York Public Library. But then the New York Public Library doesn't know, because he was broadcast on NBC Red in the 40s, whether they can give it to us. And I'm saying, no, our main consultant is the guy who gave you the material. And by the way, NBC Red may own the broadcast, but not the script. So there's a lot of parsing I think we need to do.
No, I've run into that too.
Yeah.
That can be very complicated and frustrating too. I totally get that. So I do want to give us some time for the audience to ask questions, if there's anyone. We have one over there. Start with the green turtleneck.
Hi, I'm Ayana Asif, and I'm a student here. I just had a quick question. I don't know if it'll make sense, but I'm a current playwright, hopefully to create a documentary, but I do a lot of my writing based on past stories of like the Middle East and Lebanon. And a lot of the time when I'm looking in the past, something that I always remember is to kind of still remember that there has to be meaning to the present, and maybe there doesn't always have to be. But my question is, at what point in your archival process do you ever have a moment where you connect this poignant moment in the past and you kind of reflect on it to the present time to kind of create change or any type of social evolution forward? Obviously, we know history repeats itself in a way, and there's a lot of healing when we look to the past, but is there ever a moment for you in your own process where you kind of make a decision that this has meaning in present time, if that makes sense?
And I think any of you can, whoever has an answer.
Okay, I'll go. Speaking of the Middle East, okay, I did a film also with NEH funding about 1913 Palestine, when Ottoman Palestine was breaking up before World War I, okay? And to do that, we had a number of people working with us, some who know modern Hebrew and Old Hebrew, some who know modern Arabic and Old Arabic, and some who know modern Turkish and Old Turkish because it was part of the Ottoman Empire. And as usual, we would go through our footnotes and try to gather these original sources and try to get the visual and visceral quality of them. And we found at some point in Jerusalem that we were not finding the Arabic material we needed. And we had gone to the Khalidi family library in Jerusalem, which are the descendants of scholars even at Columbia today, Rashid Khalidi and his uncle Walid. And then we sent somebody who was not us into the library, who was able to discover that in the basement there is a room called AP, okay, of Hebrew University, and that is for appropriated property in 48. So, you know, there are unexpected things you come across, you know, that change the perspective. And it's interesting to tell history through different perspectives rather than some omniscient idea of what happened.
I'll just add to that, just in a broader scope. To me, what was so surprising was for a time period after 1898, the white supremacists, who were typically, well, it was everybody, but the richest people had the most images, had the most letters, were able to document their history and preserve that. And they were very proud of what they did. They ran on it. They became the Secretary of the Navy. They became congresspeople. And they eventually, their archives found their way to the libraries. And so it was when I was reading these letters that were kept about the brutality because they were proud of what they had done that I was just drawn into the present, because it's not that long ago. I mean, obviously we're telling a historical story, but you know, this language it could have been written today. And I think just seeing that like visceral, holding that letter that this guy donated, because he was like, everybody should read this, was one of those moments for me.
For me, I mean, the answer is absolutely. That's the whole point of our film, that finding these things in the past transform our understanding of ourselves and history. And I'll say that I watched Selina with a kind of hunger, soul hunger, seek those who gave her life and who made her who she is, and I did the same. And I was both interested in the sins of my ancestors, for which I needed to do all kinds of repair. And this was, this archival work is not the only kind of repair, but for example, my cousins and I inherited the family house that you see, plantation. And my cousins bought me and my sisters out, and I gave my portion as an act of reparation to a Black-led organization down there. And I hadn't told my cousins until they watched the film, which was this month. And in a sense, the film makes the case for both the history of love in our family that leads to this value system that would, in the context of our family, naturally seek to be a part of the healing of the damage we've done, but also to really lay it out, the damage we've done. And so my cousins came up to me and signed on to the work afterward, and also said they're proud of this act. And I just mean that to say that we are raising children, and we can either perpetuate a narrative that led to the political events of this week, and is in this time where the way history is taught is on the chopping block, which makes centers of history keeping like yours all the more important. Take responsibility in our own families to truth tell and to understand the responsibility and accountability that is ours based on the facts that they can read and see.
Are there other questions? We have time for a couple more. Yes. You've got a mic there.
Oh, sorry. Gordon Quinn, been making films for a long time, over 50 years, and I just want to remind all the documentary filmmakers here that we are also creating archives with everything that we do. And we spent 2 years investigating and finally settled on Washington University as the place to put archive. But in many ways, I wish that I saved everything, almost, but I wasn't really thinking about preserving everything. So we made a lot of mistakes over the years that if I had it to do over, I would think about it differently.
Wise words.
Particularly in marginalized communities, our organizations aren't as secure and robust as we'd like them to be. And so there's always this question of where to put material. And, a few years ago, I tried to reach out to this institution of note that deals with African American history to find a place to put the archives of a very unique arts cultural organization. And it was like pulling teeth, trying to kind of get them to, pay attention or even to have it happen. And so I'm wondering, what do you do in those instances where, you know, you have the best intentions, you have a great repository of work that needs to go somewhere because it's important work, but the cultural institutions that are owned and led by people of color are precarious, or in a precarious place. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm trying to figure it out. I mean, it is truly a problem, I think. And yeah, I mean, you're speaking of Black institutions. It also is, you know, where the money is, where value. I mean, I think we need, that is part of the sharing out, and also kind of educating folks in the community that this is worth so much for future generations. And whether it's people in the community or people in the institutions, it's like that connection has to happen. Otherwise, you might as well keep it in the attic, right? But that's super exciting to me, is to try and figure that out.
And also, you know, what ultimately happened is that that material went to the university where the founder of this organization has his archives. And so I'm also wondering about, when that happens, is there a conversation, do you know of a conversation that is to be had with a majority institution that marginalized communities can have to say, I want this community to have access to it in a way that you typically don't give access?
No, but I think that's a really good conversation to be having. I mean, I think that there are more and more ways to do preservation inexpensively, which I think should help that process, because obviously resources are a big part of the problem, as you're saying. The organizations that do exist tend to be under-resourced, which makes access really difficult, and all of those things. And I mean, Archival Producers Alliance is like one of our intentions is around preservation, and around, that's one of our initiatives, is a preservation initiative, so we should continue the conversation. Yeah. There was a couple questions in the back, and then I think we have to wrap. We have 2 more questions.
Great. First of all, thank you so much, everybody on the panel.
Sorry, I did say.
That's okay, I got it, I'm good. Second, I'm glad
it's
that
for
we're-
the recording.
The recording, okay, in that case, I'll be happy to. Okay, so first of all, thank you all very much. Really appreciate the talk. Second, I'm glad we're archiving today's symposium. So that's covered. I wanted to ask, you guys spoke about working with illustrators and animators, and that process of, again, bringing all this to life, visual storytelling, particularly when it's archival stuff where maybe you just have some photographs. Can you talk about that? How do you find the people that you're looking for? How do you work with them? Sort of go deeper into that, if you could, please. Thank you.
We had obviously major gaps that we needed to fill in. So we knew from the get-go that we were going to hire an animation team. It was mostly about the style and when we wanted to use it. And our directors were very much inspired by Kara Walker's work, or like the movie Candyman, or my favorite, Harry Potter Part 2, that little scene. So it's kind of that like shadow silhouette imagery. And we thought or the directors thought that would also serve to show factually what's happening without re-traumatizing a community, because you don't see, there's not faces, it's silhouettes. So that we found that animator through a previous project that one of our directors had worked with him on, and then he brought his team, and they just kind of took it away, and I think it looks really good in the film.
And if we can ask too, what was the budget? I'd love to hear what your budget is for animation.
Right, a lot. It's hard work, and then they have to work till the very end. I don't have an exact number for you, but it was bigger than our archival budget.
Just generality of a number, broad base?
I'm not gonna. I'm sorry.
All right, we have time for one.
But other people on the panel?
When we took a recreation budget that we couldn't do because of pandemic and moved it into graphics and tried to build that bit of storytelling where you have to put 4 photos together of people in an empty photo of a saloon or a place, or in our case, the Store Club in New York where Winchell called home. You know, I mean, we easily took 100,000 out of recreation and put it right into a combination of archive and the animating. We work in Boston with a group that calls themselves Hand Cranked, which is hand cranked, which is interesting in that they are, of their own volition and interest, part of this movement that I'm not, clearly, but have helped us in doing films about old technology, whether it's telegraph stuff, whether it's newspaper stuff, that goes back to historical collectors and things that abound in New England that don't in Los Angeles, where I come from.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question before we wrap. Was there? I thought I saw another hand in the back. Yes, the woman in the back with dark hair.
I just had a question actually about the fact that so much of colored history and anti-colonial narrative is passed down through word of mouth from one generation to the next. So you don't really have the luxury of having, you know, proof points, physical proof points. So I was wondering how you all, perhaps one, collect that history, because their word truly is their bond, and the repetitive nature of a lot of those stories essentially is a proof of its truth. So I'm wondering, how do you all collect that, perhaps how the Alliance does this, and how do you use it and incorporate it in a lot of the work that you do?
I will talk to that. I collected lots of oral history, family stories, and those are historical records. Are they all true? Not necessarily. I would have one auntie say one story on the same topic, and the other auntie would tell it differently in another. Still, it's my family's history. And it was a little bit challenging because there's like the family story, this family line, that, you know, it's the same story that they all tell, which I know is not factually true. And I actually didn't include it in the film. So yeah, I mean, I feel like the stories that are passed down are super important, regardless if you then go and, you know, find out, oh, no, that's not right. Or even in the genealogy work, oh, that isn't really my uncle, right? I mean, there's lots of things that I have found and as part of my story and my family's story, but, you know, it's our stories. It's our stories.
Just one point. I think it's possible, or I try to sometimes see, is there a way to take that one auntie told it one way and another auntie told it another way, and play them opposite each other, so that we don't deny that one auntie is wrong or that maybe something else, but that memory is itself a very sometimes elusive thing, but can be adding texture rather than trying to define information.
Can I also say to that point that's specifically the type of thing that journalists usually ding documentary filmmakers on. Yeah. So one of the things that we do at Double Exposure is give workshops on fact checking. And so I think a lot of us as documentarians can also set up kind of some type of structure. That's the beauty of double exposure, if I say so myself, in that we bring the journalists in together with the filmmakers. And so I think it's important for us to have those conversations. I can go to Nina and be like, okay, Nina, from the world of journalism, June, what exactly do I do in this instance, where it's anecdotal and not fact-checked? And so I think that's why this exists, so that we can kind of cross-pollinate, so that we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but give it the journalistic underpinnings so that we can include it in the film, possibly, in my humble opinion.
I think that's all we have time for, so can we just give it up for this amazing panel?
Oh, can I say one thing? Acts of Reparation, 11 o'clock tomorrow.
Yes, oh yes, what are people's films?
Wilmington, sometime on Sunday, I want to say 1:30.
Bombshell.
Still working on it.
We'll get back to you.
We'll get back to you.
Keep an eye out for it.
So
Thank you all.
I can take your